بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا وحبيبنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Dr. Sultan Hatab. As the brother mentioned, I am the CEO of the Afia Project, an organization that was started in 2018 by a few like-minded individuals who felt that it was necessary to sort of try and tackle the psychoeducation parts of the Muslim community. Okay, so let's begin, inshallah. So I call this talk comebacks after setbacks, simply because I was just thinking to myself, what is probably the most important thing that young Muslims need to know about when it comes to having awareness about their own states. And often we tend to neglect the lessons that we can learn from those who came before, those things that have happened in our lives, and all the lessons that sort of can be taken from our surroundings and the people around us. So let's start, inshallah. So stress and resilience. Very quickly, I'm going to go over some simple topics, right? So stress is defined as the adverse reaction people have to excessive pressures or other types of demand placed on them. Okay. Therefore, there are pressures in life which do not cause us stress. I.e., at one point it might have been stressful for you to cross a road. Now for you don't think about it twice. At one point it might have been difficult for you to file in legal documentation or buying food from a corner shop or anything really. And then after a while, you built the resilience needed such that it doesn't cause you a problem anymore. And the best example I tend to give is at the bottom, you see the essentially the curve, the performance stress curve. It's what I would like to deem as the student's best example of how productive they can be based on the amount of stress that they're feeling at one point in time. So obviously at the beginning of the academic year, far away from examinations, you'll probably have a low level of stress. And as you're approaching, you'll start having enough stress that you'll probably push yourself to have, some as much productivity as possible. And then after which, if there's way too much stress, your productivity sort of rapidly declines. This is quite common example that most young people have. So resilience is defined as the capacity to recover quickly from difficulty. Okay, it's like resilience is like any other sort of motion or learning process. The more you do it, the better you will become at it, and your brain will be able to sort of function things. For example, they say that to become a master at to become an expert at any sort of art is to do something about 1,000 times or so, but to become a master is about 10,000 times. The best example I can say is like free kicks. In order to get a very good technique for free kicks at football, the more you do so, the better you'll be at it. So it's the same way with resilience. However, certain difficulties cause our resilience to take a hit. Okay, and that's unfortunately a reality that we have in sort of society. So this is a very common, and I think it's a bit crude example of what people would deem as a stress bucket. So there is a bucket, evidently, which essentially holds the sort of the things that burden us. Okay, so at the deeper parts is the sort of the stressful things that will cause you to be concerned all the time. So rent, examinations, family drama, healthcare, relationships, friendships, faith. And then the top parts is probably what you would deem as the buffer zone, the thing that can go up and down. And it's usually your daily sort of things that can contribute and then you let go. So it could be something as simple as, you slipped and fell on the road. And you didn't hurt yourself, but it was kind of embarrassing. Or somebody swore at you on the street, or you were stuck behind a very slow driver and you made you late to work, or something like that. things that you would deem to be trivial but can cause you to be quite stressed. Now, what I wanted to highlight was, well, we have these coping skills, these little ones here, which will reduce the amount of sort of fluid inside the bucket. Um, but what happens if the taps themselves are unhelpful? Meaning the fluid will come out, but then essentially go back in another route. And then what will happen is that you see this the splash here. If all the problems sort of overwhelm you and you're not able to handle it, that's when you start having the meltdowns, the problems, the reactions, etc. And this is a very common scenario that people tend to have, um, where they allow things to accumulate and they don't have the capacity needed at that point in time to handle it. And it's as common as every day for you and me. Okay, so managing basic stress. One of the ways that I tend to say that coping strategies that many people tend to do is breathing techniques. Okay, it's just sometimes it's important to just take a step back, breathe, take in the situation, because often when people are stressed, they tend to they tend to breathe shallowly. It changes their sort of acid-based status in their in their bloodstreams, and deeper breathing has been shown to induce sort of relaxation. So belly breathing. So what belly breathing is that most people when they breathe, they only really engage the upper and middle lobes of their lungs, and that's why every 20 minutes or so you just like psychologically, not subconsciously take a deep breath in and out so that your lungs don't stay collapsed. Okay. Um, but belly breathing, the point of it is that you breathe in enough such that your lungs expand, and then your stomach your abdomen expands a little bit, showing that there is pressure on your diaphragm such that it pushes stuff out. And if the diaphragm decreases, that means your lungs are being inflated. So just taking a deep breath, okay? And alongside taking deep breathing, often when people are stressed, they tend to have tense shoulders. So it's just about relaxing that and being conscious of that. So relax your shoulders, take a deep breath in. Now, my best way to encourage a quick release is that you tell somebody, okay, relax your shoulders, take a deep breath in, a little bit more, and out. Because most people, they take a deep breath in as normal, but then you always have a capacity to take a little bit more. And then that will give you that shock you need to sort of expand and breathe. Okay, that's one. Mindfulness techniques. Now, I'm not a huge fan of mindfulness. I think it's essentially um, secular prayer. Okay, we have our salah. Our salah is there to allow us to connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to allow us to focus on one thing, to allow us to be there in the moment, be present. But many people find it helps. So if that works for you, then absolutely. There's an app called Sabr. There's also Headspace and some other stuff, but Sabr is specifically Muslims orientated. So you can always have a look at that. I don't know if it's free or requires a subscription. I believe some aspects of it is free, but it's worth investing in if you have the capital. Organizing time. Most people, they tend to have issues with managing their time, and that can become stressful. That can add stuff onto you and then sort of reduce your resilience for more important things elsewhere. When I say be realistic, I mean, when you organize your time, make sure you're doing things right, and manageable and on one platform. So some people, they have separate apps for different things and diaries and this and that. It can always cause being overwhelmed. So know what's good for you. I believe I was there to catch the last part of Brother Salah's talk, and it was very he was quite accurate in terms of being able to manage your time well. Now, being aware of your environment. Your environment is almost absolutely key to your ability to process things. If you're in an environment where there's always tension, where there's always arguments, where there's always things that don't sort of conduce to a healthy lifestyle, it's not going to help you long term. So sometimes just removing yourself from an environment, be it temporarily, yeah, or even permanently, can do wonders for your own well-being. However, there's a caveat to that. There's a lot of people, they fall into what is escapism, various forms of escapism, and in this way, some people, they'll just keep running away from their problems rather than dealing with it, because they'll run away, the problems eventually catch up to them. They'll run away, they eventually catch up. Whereas dealing with it head on can sometimes just eradicate the issue entirely. Again, it's all case by case scenarios. Delegate appropriately. If you're finding that you're being overwhelmed by like chores, by tasks, etc. If you can find a way to delegate elsewhere to sort of reduce your workload and to something more manageable, then that's absolutely key. And very, very important. Looking out for your friends. If all of us were people who looked out for ourselves, which is great. If we did that, fantastic. We'll have a community of people who are looking out for themselves. But if you're somebody who looks out for their friend, then there'll be a friend that's looking out there for you. And that way, you'll be able to help each other without necessarily being judgmental or anything harmful. And you'll find some solace there. Eating well, sleeping well, being well. This goes for itself. I'm not going to baby you. You're all adults. You should. This is just very key. What, I might as well say one thing to brothers who go to Isocs. I know what it's like when you go to Isoc, especially at King's Isoc. You don't really do much apart from eat. So, and the amount of years we've spent in our local chicken cottage was probably a bit too much, and put on a lot of kilograms. So it's important to understand that if you want to function well, what you're eating will be affecting you. And I know this, especially when I'm doing long 13-hour shifts in like A&E or wherever I am at. They'll if I eat something that's too heavy, that's sort of heavy food, or something that's not really healthy, something that's not going to give me energy, I will feel it later, and it will affect my ability to handle things. I'm sure many of us will understand. Sleeping, of course, is key. If you don't sleep properly, that will inevitably affect your resilience and being well. Okay, this is something where your lifestyle is very important. Okay, everyone talks about mental health. Well, I'm not talking about mental health. Mental health is a clinical thing. Depression, psychoses, OCDs, personality disorders, Alzheimer's, dementias, etc. That's all clinical. What I'm talking about is mental well-being. Now, mental well-being is everyone's business. And this is where you actively put in investment into your own sort of psychological well-being so that you're able to function as much as you can. If you're finding that your time is being affected, usually there's an health well-being related issue. If you're finding that your motivation is being affected, as a well-being issue. If you're finding your relationships are being affected, as a well-being issue. All of this requires input, active input. Okay. So, alhamdulillah. So, what is trauma? Okay, let me just move from this. So, trauma is an event or collection of events which causes an incredible amount of fear or intense distress. Okay, and some of these emotions that can be caused by it, these distressful emotions, are feeling frightened, under threat, humiliated, rejected, abandoned, invalidated, unsafe, unsupported, trapped, ashamed, powerless. Okay, I think Mind wrote something about this last year. But those are just some of the emotions you can feel from having a traumatic experience. All right. Any one of these traumatic experiences can be ongoing, can be a one-off event, like being robbed, or an ongoing thing, which is like an abusive family member, or anything really. Yeah, or even watching somebody else being abused, or somebody else being attacked or killed even, and so many things can cause trauma. Okay. Now, what I wanted to focus on today was something called intergenerational trauma and habits. Now, let's talk about one thing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah is known as, we call Allah, we say Rabbi, Rabbi, our Lord. Now, people translate Rabbi as into our Lord, but another sort of probably more accurate translation for Rab is a nurturer. Yeah, is somebody who raises and grows and sort of make something flourish, okay, with their own guidance. That is essentially the crux of what a Rabb is. And when you have people that are murabbi, you have your murabbis, your elders. The reason why they're called murabbi is because they're there to give guidance and raise and nurture and support those who come after them, so that they're able to they use their own sort of knowledge and experience in order to help those who came afterwards. However, nowadays, what you find is the word murabbi has actually been used to define just people who are older in age, not necessarily somebody who raises or sort of nurtures anyone. Okay, so just because somebody is, I don't know, however older than you, they would be deemed to be your murabbi. So okay, so every generation has its own trials and tribulations, and learning and habits often get passed on to the next in order to learn. Okay, so uh, if it, what I'm trying to get at is that if you look at the history, all the trials that have happened in the past can somewhat be relevant now, because history is cyclic. It happens. The same thing will happen over and over again. My favorite example, Ronald Reagan and then Donald Trump, two identical, absolute morons who became powerful at one point in time. And, society really almost didn't really recognize that history is, will repeat itself. And the reason why that is because the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created us is that we should take guidance from the past. Allah has revealed the Quran for us to read and look at the lives of the Prophet alayhi salam, and look at the and he sent for us hadith and the stories of those who came before us, so that we may take wisdoms from them. Okay, and we take wisdom such that we could implement into our own lives and understand how to get about doing certain things. Now, I might think, okay, well, this was thousands of years ago and etc. But there's always aspects we can learn. Okay. Now imagine Allah didn't guide us. Imagine Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just left us to it. We'd all be living off trial and error forever. And it's really important to understand why Allah has given us guidance. Okay. So each and every single one of our generations have their own trials individually. Okay. And unfortunately, we have people who deal with things in a way that's not conducive to a healthy lifestyle, and that leads to bad coping strategies and habits that may get passed on. And if you have bad habits that are passed on, then you have an environment which is full of bad habits, which can then fester and which creates toxicity, which then furthers on to more toxicity. It's like for lack of a better word, it is a positive cycle of negativity, if you may. And if you're in an environment which fosters such terrible circumstances, it will inevitably affect your ability to form healthy new relationships with people, be it man, woman, child, whatever. It will always affect that, because you don't really know what would be the right thing to do in a circumstance. So let's look at one example. I'm giving a very, very generic example. Grandparents, they dealt with the hardships of life back home. They could have been, refugees or war victims, or political victims, or whatever you may call it, ostracized from home, or just living a very, very difficult physical life. And then their children, the parents of people who were born in war-torn areas, decide to maybe migrate to this country or other countries and establish themselves a new life, and having to deal with the stresses of not having any stability or a home necessarily, or having to deal with constant racism and being belittled, or having to be able to try and have some time for their families, but they can't because they're working, or being able to show that you're fund people back home. And then you have the children of those people who experience their own trauma, as we see in our day-to-day lives. It's very different to theirs, but it's still there. And then they may have perceived neglect and cultural identity crises. Now, what is likely to be the poor coping strategies that have been passed on? What's key here is to understand how things were dealt with back home. So not back home, but the older generation. The older generations, they were just simply very, to their credit, just got on with it. They got on with it. They put aside anything that required any sort of self um, need or matching their own needs. Remember, back a lot of people, they're collectivist rather than individualistic. And with the collectivist mindset is that your needs are always secondary to the congregation. Whereas we've come here to this country and we have been told, no, you matter, and your views do matter. And as a result, we were trying to sort of cross over several different mindsets and find some sort of comfort in them, and that's where you get your cultural identity crises from. And this is why also a lot of people are terrified of being cultural, because they find that they don't fit in anywhere. Whereas, by the way, on a side point, I do think we've created our own British Muslim culture. We fall into this sort of new category of British Muslims, which are very much similar to one another, but not so much to the Muslims back home or the non-Muslims over here. Anyway, so poor coping strategies is one, not talking about it as a whole. You don't talk about your difficulties. Two, the fear of stigma from other communities mean that you don't mention the idea of mental illness. Some people genuinely believe, and it's not some people, a lot of people genuinely believe it is not appropriate to talk about mental illness within the household. Okay, and this will cause more discord because people don't really understand it. But that's a separate issue. The third thing, what are the poor coping strategies that they've created? It is the feeling of having to need to bottle it up and not process it later, or if you do process it, they process it in unhealthy ways, which could be almost physical. Okay, often we find people, they tend to, if they've been abused in the past or physically assaulted or what have you, they found that a lot of the ways that people dealt with things in their previous generations were physical, then they themselves will deal with things in a physical way. Nowadays, it's manifests differently. If for example, if what is your typical example of somebody who self-harms or has like like an eating disorder or something? It's a high functioning, intelligent young female in this country, and she may have been abused when she was younger, physically, sexually, however, and as a result, she deems that the only way to deal with emotions that she cannot handle or he cannot handle is in that manner, and physically. So people tend to self-harm as a coping strategy. Now, I'm not saying that that's being handed over by the generations. I'm saying it's trauma that was faced previously, which has then translated onto modern day sort of situations. And this is why, subhanAllah, it's very important that we tackle this, because most of our problems now would have stemmed from problems that arrived previously. So, what we can do. Firstly, recognize the issue within yourself. Are your family a victim of intergenerational trauma? Are they being affected by behaviors and characteristics that have been passed on for a long period of time? Okay, this is key. Now, many of you probably have thought about it, but and maybe many of you haven't. But remember, you yourself are not your family. Maybe you could possibly be, but then there's people around you as well. And then you raise the issue. So whenever I look at my family, for example, I always ask my parents, tell me about that one time where you experienced incredible amounts of hardship and difficulty. And then I ask them, would it have been made easier if you had somebody around you to talk to and be supported by? And so at first they're always like, no. And then after you leave them for a bit, and then you raise the issue later on and say, you know what if, what if when you had that issue, somebody was around, maybe you could have talked to them. And then eventually they do start thinking about it. Because remember, these all traumatic episodes are hard for people to think about. They're always difficult. They always come with their emotions, and they'd rather not think about it. They'd rather think of it as something that they've overcome and never have to go back to again. But when they understand that there could have been a way to do things differently, it may open their mind to, you know, other things being done differently within the household now, or within their lives now. Okay. This is what's key. And that's the question. So do others recognize that this is causing problems? Okay. So is it not just the parents? Maybe it could be your siblings, could be aunts, uncles, grandparents, friends, distant relatives. Could be association with bad people. Could be anything. So if you what are people able to recognize that that's causing a problem? Let's start. The next step is, if they do recognize that there is an issue, then you need to start the process of healing. Or if you do recognize that there's an issue, that you're being affected by intergenerational trauma. Okay, and intergenerational trauma, there's also such thing as intergenerational healing as well, meaning that when you learn lessons from events from the past, if you learn lessons from events in the present, and you start actively working towards creating good coping strategies, not only will you have tried to fix the issues at that point in time, you will pass it on, and they will not face the same amount, or those who come after you will not face the same level of difficulty and trauma. I'm not saying that they will face the same traumas or difficulties. They will inevitably face their own hardships, but it's about having the skills necessary to be able to cope in an appropriate manner. The sentence here may, you require a trusted individual, third party. This is specifically for like your parents or grandparents, etc. A lot of the way that people used to work is, when it comes to really important or personal things, often they require people that they trust. They won't just listen to anyone. So sometimes if there's a matter that needs to be dealt with, you do need to get somebody that they trust. It's usually, people tend to go to their imams before they go to their doctor. And there's a reason for that. It's to do with, the way they were raised. They only trust certain types of people. That's for them to decide. Okay. And if you can just utilize said people to sort of help the process, that's great. If not, no worries. Now, communicate openly. This is so key. All toxic environments are a result of some sort of poor communication. Okay? Sometimes you do need to air feelings and concerns in an environment. If you don't verbalize certain things and you feel like, oh no, we need to have some sharam and this and that, there is a way of verbalizing concerns and verbalizing your feelings without necessarily being offensive. Okay, this is a key. If you verbalizing how you're feeling about a certain situation with respect, okay, with adab, you will inevitably find that people may not react well to it at first, but then eventually you create a culture where they'll be able to accept it. It will take time and it's not easy. There will be problems at first, but communicating openly is so important. SubhanAllah, I can't stress this enough. I don't really have. Okay. Right. Make this very quick, inshallah. Right. Become the facilitator. Safe spaces can be held by yourself so long as you remind people that it's a safe space. And also make sure you utilize a safe space yourself. So if you need a safe space for your own sort of issues first, because remember, you can't help somebody else unless you help yourself. So help yourself first. Utilize a safe space. But if you're comfortable enough to go ahead and deal with these things, I always go to my family members and be like, look, if you need to talk to somebody with privacy and confidentiality, etc., and you need a safe space to just talk to me or vent or what have you, feel free. At first they'll not use it. The more you remind them, the more you sort of, you'd be like, okay, no worries, I'm here if you need me. And then, if you see them struggling, just say, let's have a chat about it, and they're like yes or no, and eventually they'll just start opening up to you these things. Okay, creating an environment where you have safe spaces to verbalize things will stop people from bottling things up and creating bad habits. All right. Be brave and persevere. Healing takes time. Okay, the whole cliche of time heals is very true. It requires time and effort. Okay, your body, your soul, your mind will take some time to process things. It's never going to be like this. Okay. Okay. And sometimes it's important to be proactive, as we're doing, creating the safe spaces, but then also reactive. So when difficulties come about, you're there whenever they sort of people need you. The knee slide injury. This is something that I sort of thought about. So let's give a scenario. You're playing football in a park and you score a fantastic solo goal. You celebrate with a knee slide, and a stone or some hard object leaves you with a knee abrasion. Okay. Go home, you clean it, you dress it, you continue. You go back out. You continue playing. Your mom says, "Why are you going back out again?" You just say, "No, I'm just here to get some water." You may give it some water. You run back outside and go play football. Okay. We've all been there. For most people, it will scab over and heal well. For other people, it might get a bit yellow, smelly, and looks a bit infected. So the people that gets infected with, they'll have a look at it and just say, let's fix this. They'll debride the wound. They'll get rid of any sort of infected-looking stuff. They'll clean it again, dress it, and keep an eye on it until it heals. Sounds a lot like trauma, doesn't it? For most people, they'll have a traumatic event. They'll develop somehow, the skills needed to deal with it, and then they just get over it, right? And then it got that resilience that they've built there goes into their bank, so that if something like this happens again, they're able to deal with it better. Whereas other people, they require some active work for them to overcome. All right, this requires them to put in work, sort of social well-being, mental well-being, etc. And then that way, they'll heal after a while. However, if you're the type of person who picks off a perfectly good scab, so if I had a scab on my knee or whatever, and it was hard, it was brown, it was healing, we're not quite there, and you just pick it off, you just expose the skin again, the wounded skin again, to more infection and other stuff. Okay. What I'm trying to get at is often people, they forcibly try and uncover trauma due to current social fads. So I think mental health and student mental health has been sort of about for the last maybe 8 years or so. And people are holding events like this where honestly people are talking about trauma, their own hardships, their own difficulties. And some people genuinely haven't been subject to it. Okay, they haven't been subject to difficulties and trauma, and they feel sort of almost left out. Okay, they feel almost left out, and they will then dig into themselves to try and find something that they can relate to. The best example I can tell you about. Okay, whilst this is a bit blasé, when we were in school, the ethnic kids used to talk about how their parents would discipline them physically, and they talk about the tools that that was used against them, frequency, circumstances, etc. And there'll be some people who never had that, and they felt a bit like they couldn't relate. So it's like this. There'll be people who feel that they can't relate. They'll try and dig up some trauma, but this mindset is actually very dangerous. It's very dangerous. I've spoken to a lot of therapists before, and sometimes they said to me, Sultan, sometimes it's just better to not delve into things. If your mind is already dealing with things in a way that a situation in the past doesn't actually cause them many troubles, to go digging and uncovering things that were already healing very well, again, it's just not beneficial. So there is the point I'm trying to get at. It is okay to be okay. There is nothing wrong with coming from a supportive family, a supportive environment, and not everyone has to have extensive traumatic issues. You don't need to dig. Leave your scabs alone. Let them heal yourself. Let them heal themselves as they are anyway. Say Alhamdulillah and you move on. All right. Many of you might be saying, okay, why is he saying all this? It's the reality is, I've seen it too many times now. There's always people, especially on social media, who are trying to be part of a trend, and it's not helpful to people that are actually suffering.
Jazakallah khair for your talk. It's very informative and well needed, especially if it was in this day and age. Okay, so the first question is, having immigrant parents that are usually detached from their parents, from their kids' lives, sorry, focusing more on working and providing, like our dads typically. How do you best open up and bring about this conversation?
This is a very, 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 very massive topic that people are discussing about. You have to understand from the perspective of men, okay? So I like talking about male mental health. And one of the things about men is that they feel the need, okay? They need to be able to provide for their families, the need to feel adequate for them, the need to feel that they're protecting them, etc. So what immigrant men tend to do is that they work very hard, long hours, difficult hours, several jobs, several investments. They try and do their best, and they might think to themselves, "Well, I would love to spend more time with my children, but I'm working really hard now." And it's only when they get older, when things are settled more, the children are already grown, that they think, I would have liked that time back. You have to understand from their perspective. They felt that they had to do what they had to do what they had to do in order for you to have the best lifestyle. And it's the same thing, I've been there. So I'm not trying to make excuses. What I'm trying to say is that it's been hard for them as well. Imagine you have your own families, etc., but you're working so hard you barely see them, and then decades later, time has flown by, and you miss out. For them, it must be really overwhelming as well. So what I would say for families is what's key is just open communication. They'll have their days off. They will have their days off. I would say that you just make sure that you try and organize time. So just like, look, you have this day off, this day off. How about we go here? How about we go here? We do this. And if they're very resistant to it, sometimes you just have to verbalize, saying, look, Baba, I rarely see you. It would be nice if we as a family were to go somewhere to do this. Do you have any time at all in the next few weeks or what have you? That would be probably key. Simply because they don't really give it much thought. They work on autopilot. Yeah, they just go ahead with it and they just deal with it. And they've never had anyone previously to ask them how they feel about something. And next thing they know, they have to deal with children, with wives, etc., and their emotions. And they only have a limited amount of capacity as well. So, firstly, have mercy upon your parents, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to have mercy on our parents. But what's key is that we are proactive as well. Okay, if you feel that you need to have more time with your parents, no problem. Speak to them, arrange things, and be proactive. I can't stress this enough. And each situation is a bit different to another. Everyone's family's dynamics are different. Everyone's sort of households are different. Everyone's needs are different. Each one requires sort of individual analysis, and you have to make the judgment. Okay.
Jazakallah khair. So the next question is, I came up with a form of escapism, which isn't physically harming me in any way. It's just escapism. However, I've now become compulsive. So how do I break out of this and heal?
My favorite escapism is one of my favorite types of questions. So the most common forms of escapism now is essentially gaming, where lots of people they have their own personas online, they have their own social circles online, and they go onto it where they're able to do something and be, and it allows them to avoid all the realities, the harsh realities of the world. The first thing is I would recommend just jumping off if you can. This is, some people do it cold turkey, some people do it in steps. It's just something that you're gonna have to figure out yourself. And then the second thing is you have to figure out, okay, why are you having to escape? Why are you trying to run away from certain things? Issues are best dealt with head on. And if you're not able to do things yourself, then you might need some help with you. And the best people to guide you in sort of the way to deal with the anxieties that are causing you to jump into escapism would be therapists, via your GP, your NHS, IAPT. You can have a look at that. And maybe even your university counselors, etc., to find out what is the root cause of the anxiety that's causing you to jump on to escapism forms. Because remember, my dear brothers and sisters, escapism, the only true escape is death. And when you start thinking about that we walk into very, very dangerous territory. Okay, so deal with your issues head on. Get some help if you can.
Jazakallah khair. So the next question is, so what advice would you give to a person that constantly worries about the past and tends to have negative assumptions about themselves?
This person is somebody whose past has really badly affected them, without a shadow of a doubt. This is somebody whose confidence levels are probably through the floor, and probably uses this method. Probably has somebody in the background at one point who was criticizing them. Probably was a victim to a lot of criticism. And you know, this isn't something you can fix. All you can do is reassure. They let them talk about the past. If they want to talk about the past, if they want to verbalize their concern, let them. Let them process it, let them heal. Always speak positively, not toxically positive, by the way. All right. There's a type of toxic positivity where somebody just like, don't worry, everything's fine, everything's written, everything blah blah blah. It's not helpful. What they're trying to do is that they're yelling out for help a lot. They're like, please help me process this, essentially. Yeah. Please help me process this. Please let me what was I saying? Please help me process this. And I just need someone to listen, and that's all it takes. So just listen to them at first, remind them of their blessings by saying, you have this going for you, you have that going for you. You know, I think you're doing really well. You know, everyone's so proud of you, etc. And give them the sort of the emotional reassurance they require in order to have that confidence they need to function. Because almost for people that have really, really low self-confidence and self-worth, it's just sometimes just reminding them. And then once you remind them enough that they become better, then you have to teach them techniques in for them to be able to recognize their own self-worth, and then that way they'll be able to handle things after that. Because there'll be a type of people who will then start depending upon yourself to tell them what their worth is, and that's not necessarily helpful long term.
Jazakallah khair. So the next question is, this cycle of learning from our elders and having a different outlook because of their upbringing, how do we then break this cycle with our own kids?
This is really important. So introspection is when you look into your own self and you look at the way you do things, the way you react to certain things, and you reflect, active reflection upon your actions, and you think, okay, was this the best way forward? Was this, did I do things right? Was there a better way? And then once you're able to actively do self-reflection and introspection, and you look within yourself and saying, what, did this situation cause me to feel a certain way, and what would be an appropriate response to it? When you're able to introspect more, then your offspring or will then recognize what you're doing. The whole concept of introspection and realizing your own mistakes and being able to learn from them, and they will do it themselves. Because reality is, with children, they are obsessed with whatever you are doing. Okay, that's why nowadays children as young as 2 years old know how to use mobile phones, because they see us using them all the time, and they're able to. My sister, she's, I don't know, very young, and she's able to use a phone better than I am. And it's interesting. And the reason why I'm saying this is because their brains are like sponges. So if you're showing good habits, then they will pick it up. But you have to actively work on yourself. The more you actively work on yourself and you're able to break those habits that came previously, then they will gain these new habits, and they will break this chain that seems to be holding us back. Right?
Yeah, Jazakallah khair. Okay, so the next question is, my issues are so deeply rooted that truly there's no solution to them. I'm not sure how to handle or manage it.
This is so if you have very extensive issues, you need to seek a qualified professional who will go through with them one by one. Okay, and if it's very big and deep, then you need to go for someone that you trust. And I would recommend you get a professional counselor, not counselor, a therapist, a psychotherapist, who will then go through whatever your issues are so deeply rooted in that they will be able to process things. Okay, I cannot stress this enough. If you're finding it difficult to manage or deal with it, always go see a specialist. Worst case, best case scenario, they'll just be like, you know what, really, you're managing okay. You're just a bit anxious about it. You can go off and do your own thing. That'll be it. Worst case scenario, you'll need to have another session. And the thing with sessions, by the way, I might as well just say this. When it comes to treatment sessions with therapists, this isn't just like, it's not going to be like this. It requires repetitive sessions, and after 10, 15, 20 sessions, you'll start to see the benefits. It's not going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 session thing. It will take some time because you're really, really delving into like the psyche here.
Okay, Jazakallah khair. So the next question is, I have friends who are really going through so much. How can I support them? Or what can I do to support them?
The best way to support your friends is simply just to be there for them, to be there, to listen. That's one. You listen. The second thing, and by listening, I mean really listen. Don't just hear them. Understand what they're saying. The second thing is validating their emotions. If they feel a certain way about it, just you have to say some things like, you know, I can't imagine what you're going through, but I can, you know, what you're feeling is totally justified. You know, there's nothing wrong with what you're feeling, you know, and you have every right to feel that way. And then if you have a suggestion, this is the one thing I always say: try not to do suggestions unless they specifically ask for it. If you need to do a suggestion, you just say, you know what, I don't know what I'd do in that situation, but I don't know. Have you thought about this? And don't try and be. Sometimes when it comes to friends, all they require is a listening ear. So the way I deal with things is when I have a session with somebody and they need to talk to me, I say, okay, bro, for 20 minutes, I'm not going to say anything. You're going to talk to me. They're like, 20 minutes is a long time. So they usually take about 10, 15 minutes to unload everything in detail. And then afterwards, they're like to me, oh, bro, and I say to them, bro, you have 5 minutes left. And then they have to think more actively to try and tell you more things. And the way that works is that they then at this point they're able to have to take stuff from deep in that bucket. You know, understand what I'm saying? So all the stuff that they just blur out, and then they have to actively try and get more out. And after 20 minutes, I say to them, okay, bro, how can I help you? And then most people, they just say, you know what, I'm feeling all right. You know, thank you for listening. But other people, they'll be like, you know what, I need some advice on this and this and this and this. So just be there to listen. I think that's the key.
Okay, Jazakallah khair for that talk and for the questions and answers. I'm sure everyone appreciated it. Pleasure having you.
Oh Allah the Almighty, Allah, Allah, protect